For those I haven't chatted with yet, my name is Judith Schwartz. I'm a journalist, and I've written 3 books. Over the course of 3 books, and over the course of 10 plus years, I've been writing about, among other things, including soil, water, and earth repair, the biotic pump, the importance of the biotic pump. So we have 3 panelists, or 3 speakers, and the first one is Susan Masino of Trinity College, who we have met previously and who's going to share with us the Proforestation story.
Good evening. I know it's late and everyone's brain is packed, so I'll just get right into it. I've also written several books totally unrelated to this topic, and I just wanted to share with you that I'm actually a neuroscientist. I'm a joint appointment in neuroscience and psychology at Trinity College. My PhD's in biology. I'm not a great biologist. I'm a decent neuroscientist, so just FYI. But some of the things I've done that overlap with the topic of this conference, I was awarded an endowed professorship of applied science at Trinity College, and I take that responsibility very seriously, and I've been working deeply at the community level and policy level as well as in my laboratory. I did a fellowship at Harvard, Charles Bullard Fellowship on Forests and Brain Health. It was a joint kind of cooperation between Harvard Forest and Harvard Medical School. And I'm also on a number of boards. This is actually a forestry organization. I'm a county coordinator for the Old Growth Forest Network, which is a national organization that's trying to at least protect 1 forest in every county to be an old growth forest, so that kids can have that experience, you know, and have it be accessible to people. I'm on my town open space commission, and we're deciding about our farms, our forests, our wetlands, our grasslands, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So sort of trying to look at the landscape and make policies about that. And I was in a big governor's council thing as well. So what I want to just say for this Proforestation for Global Wellbeing, with this really, another term that I sort of use for this is, what are our real ecological lifelines? So kind of bringing us back to the topic of the first session for today, what are our ecological lifelines that are stabilizing the climate and providing a, you know, healthy system for all of us, and how do we manifest that across the range of urban, suburban, and rural landscapes? And where I live in Connecticut has basically all of those pieces, and I'm from kind of a town in Massachusetts as well. And I also put the why in the middle to explain that first before the where. So my life is boiled down to 2 exact things, that only things I usually think about are, we absolutely need nature, which we all know, and we also need healthy brains. And I've sort of identified these as the 2 irreducible things that we cannot get below those 2 essentials. So I hope we can all agree about that. And in kind of coming to this convergence accidentally, it was because of working in my community to protect a forest on top of our drinking water that I accidentally got into this whole thing that's taken over my life. I used to be a regular neuroscientist, and now it's kind of all mixed up. And in identifying these 2 irreducible things, I ran across, and I'm almost verklempt about the things that people mentioned earlier today that I have throughout my talk. I really discovered an elephant in the room, that we're not being specific enough and truthful enough about what we're saying, about what we're doing, where, and why. And this is a problem that's confusing to the public, it's confusing to the environmental community, it's confusing to policymakers, and that is a key problem. So, you know, elephants are often in the china shop doing a lot of damage, but I've decided, and this is funny because Anastasia showed the small flower, I've decided this is a nice elephant, you know, that we need to just bring this elephant into the room and share some flowers with the elephant, and we can all get on the same page, because this is for everyone. It's not against anyone, it's for everyone. And so if we try and look at this question of what we're doing, where, and why, I sort of divided this into 3 big buckets. Like, where are we just protecting nature for all the things we've been talking about? What are the areas that we're using for research, which is ongoing accumulation of knowledge by whatever form or culture or methods, etc. And what are the areas we're using for resources, for our farms, our housing, our renewable energy, all our infrastructure and all of that. So these are kind of the strategic decisions we need to make, and I hope we can also agree that there's some areas that are appropriate for resource use or extraction or buildings, and there's some areas that are more appropriate for nature, and there's some overlap in these categories. To try and understand where are these areas that are sort of prioritized for nature for all the reasons, in New England, there's a recent report that just came out. I'm a co-author, and it was over 150 individuals and groups, etc., that contributed to it. I'm going to use the name Wildlands, which is the title of this report, which talks about the science and history of these natural areas in New England and where are they. So wildlands are defined basically as areas with, that are intended to allow natural processes to prevail with minimal human interference. So also acknowledging that we've lived in and with nature for millennia, and we can do that without, severely damaging it, altering it, etc. So wildlands don't ban people, they don't ban doing what you need to do, but the intent is to give nature some room to breathe, and that is key to our survival. So if I think about these three buckets, this wildland area is really, what I would call our essential core lifeline of land and water. And as a biomedically trained scientist, I would say, okay, this is kind of our first do no harm areas. So do what you need to, but you're not, we're not going to be putting solar panels all over it, etc. Research obviously can overlap with this, and this is where I think we're gaining knowledge by a whole bunch of different methods, and where we can start to learn about how to be really wise about what we're doing with our land and water. And also, what are our resources? How can we talk about highest and best use, local resources, integrated systems, and reducing the waste in our system? There's so much waste in food, energy, all kinds of resources. So this is like an interconnected problem. And I almost want to say it's complicated, but at the same time, some of the clear things we need to decide are relatively simple. The simple thing I'm going to talk about today is this elephant that I haven't given a name to, but the question this elephant is asking is, where are the wildlands? And this is not optional. And the harrowing conclusion of that report, and I already knew it was a problem, but I didn't know how serious it was, is that there are almost none in New England, which is a gorgeous forested region. And as I mentioned last night, it's only 3%, and most of that has no strong permanent protection as such. It's a policy, a pen swipe that can change overnight. And so realizing that this is so fundamental, I've really started working at the intersection of health, climate, and ecology, and it's very clear to me that there are a number of common solutions, but land and water, this kind of lifeline, is a common solution to our interconnected problems, and we can't ignore that, and we need to be specific about it. And so when I was at Harvard during the fellowship, I collaborated with a climate scientist and an ecologist, and we wrote a paper on proforestation, which is basically saying, where are the areas that we're letting these natural systems kind of breathe and evolve and adapt? And so we coined the term proforestation to add to the kind of toolbox of forest-related terms like afforestation, reforestation, deforestation. And it's not a new idea. There's terms for how this can happen. In the US, it's called GAP 1 or GAP 2, or IUCN categories for managing and stewarding land. So it's not a new idea, but it's a specific idea that we need to take seriously. And sort of the key points about proforestation is it's just letting some existing forests grow. It's a cost-effective and scalable opportunity for all the benefits, including climate stabilization. It's suitable for forests that aren't intended for resources or research experiments, so there's absolutely some forests we need for those other things. And it's something we could prioritize where it makes sense on public land. And I think it should also be an option on private land, particularly private land that contributes to the ecological lifelines I'll give you a little bit more detail about. And it also dramatically supports public health. Paulo talked about love, and I had already had this little heart on my slide before you said that, because People love these places. And from working at the community level on protecting that forest on top of our drinking water, I was very well known in that effort, so a lot of people would contact me from all over. And the grief they would feel at the place that they loved, that they thought was a little special place that they could have to enjoy and bring their kids to, and it would be cut down, there would be no good reason. Then you'd find out the wood was exported or burned, and then it just turns into like a hot invasive area that you never go to again. That place is now lost to you and your children and your kind of well-being and the community and all of that. So we need places to fall in love with if we're going to kind of solve this problem. And these need to be available to people in all types of communities. So this is a little area in Hartford. Hartford's a very distressed city. Connecticut has the richest and the poorest neighborhoods in the US. But there's still old growth forests in Hartford. There's these beautiful, cool areas. This little river area has trees that are almost 300 years old. And you can see it's just a sanctuary and a refuge and a natural cooling center and a place for people to just get together and get away from things. None of them have any protection as what I would call a wildland. It's an unseen and undiscussed crisis. So, as I said, this is not a new idea. Indigenous people certainly had areas that were considered sanctuaries or areas that were, for their kind of health and refuge, etc. And in talking to people, so organic, kind of pioneer in organic kind of gardening, told me that his uncle, who's an indigenous elder in Maine, when he was a boy and he went to run off the trail in the spring, he said, no, don't run off the trail in the spring because the forest is pregnant, right? Like something like that. And I just talked to someone last night, coincidentally, and he said, yeah, well, my uncle would take me to the top of the mountain and look at the sunrise. And he said, look at the sunrise with your heart. So there's all these like ways that they're, connect to the land with our bodies that we've kind of lost. And it's not a surprise because we've kind of lost our connection to our body in general. Like we don't know what to eat, we don't know what to do, we're sick. It's crazy. I also wanted to mention Frederick Law Olmsted, kind of the founder of landscape architecture, who was kind of pivotal values that are put into our national parks and many parks and landscapes. And he understood that urbanization was wearing down our battery. And at a time when a lot of the health issues were sanitation and dysentery and toxins and things like that, he was trying to provide sunlight and foliage and clean air and a way to get away for people, particularly people that didn't have money or time to go off in the summer for a vacation. He wanted these areas to be available for everyone. And two genius things, though there's many genius things, is he only planted in the cities native plants as a way to connect people to the larger landscape. And that's a big movement now, right? To like plant pollinators and native plants and all that. He was already on that case. And he also was so committed at a time when everyone wanted to know like what's this and very kind of like science industrial minded. He knew that we needed to connect to the beauty and the mystery of life. And he was very comfortable sharing that and knowing that that was really important for people. Related to this, there's a lot of work on the healing power of awe, and nature is one of the most powerful ways to provoke awe. And awe, it makes us more compassionate, reduces our ego, makes us more creative. There's so many altruistic, so cooperative, so all of the things you would want in a community that you are happy to be part of are promoted by awe. And nature is one of the most powerful ways to promote awe, as well as reduce depression, anxiety, and a whole bunch of other things. So back to a little point about proforestation. When we did a survey, it's kind of a systematic review of the literature, all of the things that you would think are good properties of forests, we found them higher in intact forests. And the two things that we found that were higher in the managed forests were burn severity and invasive plant species. And this is the scourge of invasive plant species is horrendous, and we're spreading them. And we're also spreading ticks, which is a public health issue. So we need to be really careful about what we're doing, where, and why, so we're not creating problems. We've published several other papers on this, on natural stewardship, and my colleague Ed published a paper on adaptation and mitigation capacity of wildland forests, looking at managed versus wild forests. And all of this data is saying that this is a responsible choice to do what I termed as a policy in my town, this natural area stewardship policy. So it doesn't ban people, it doesn't ban management, it just adopts kind of a medical, common sense approach. And these are also areas, if they're large enough and connected, etc., that support, you know, the ongoing climate regulation and function of the biotic pump. So like in medicine, it's an opportunity where you're keeping an eye on things, you're not neglecting it. So in medicine, they might call it expectant management or watchful waiting. And it's an opportunity to sort of set up a triage system so that you can spend your resources, time and money and whatever resources they are, on areas that really do need help and you know that you can help them. Because the idea that we can, you know, perfectly manipulate and garden every little thing and that we know exactly what we're doing is just, we've already talked about that, it's not rational. So if we look at the land use in New England, this is the kind of hopeful message, is that we have some land that's developed in dark red, agriculture, which I would argue we need a lot more. All of this is forest, all this green, but only this little tiny section is wildland forest, and most of that has no strong long-term protection. So what we really need to do is upgrade some of this protected forest to wildland, or shift some of this up to wildland, and protect some of this forest that doesn't have any protection right now. We have a lot of room to work, but we can't do that work if we don't talk about the exact problem that we're dealing with. I would contend that we need to right away start talking about, especially on public land, where's our water, where's our headwaters, our old forests, critical habitats, wildlife corridors, kind of core areas, so we have large enough areas and can connect those areas to basically set up a network of our ecological lifelines. A strategic plan like this is the only way we're going to have a functional, long-term ecological situation for everyone and start to achieve some of the goals of, you know, what's been termed 30 by 30 or half Earth. And what's been clear to me as a liberal arts professor, and I, you know, kind of swim widely among disciplines, is that right now so many different disciplines are talking about this same thing, like where's our lifelines? And when you have so many different disciplines all talking about the same thing, E.O. Wilson wrote this book called Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge. So it's the jumping together of knowledge from different fields. We shouldn't ignore that. So the other message that I always put in my talks and I put in my big report to the state is that we need to stop this division between scientists and non-scientists as a thing, because we all have the ability to gather information and ask questions and think critically. So that's a separate topic, but we need to have people regain their kind of capacity and inherent ability to ask questions and confidence in their ability to do that. So I'm just wrapping up, and what I wanted to say is this quote I read in a newsletter that I get from someone who used to work at World Watch, that the biosphere is divided between natural ecosystems that work for stability and disturbed ecosystems that cannot do that work. And when I read that quote, that's when I reached out to Anastasia, because I said, yes, that is what's going on, and we have to make sure that we stop damaging the ecosystems that are working for our stability. I think the only way to do that is if we set up a serious, you know, interdisciplinary, international effort without conflicts of interest. So people have said, like Tomby said, like, oh, we always have OPEC in the room. Conflicts of interest range among habits, social conflicts, cognitive conflicts, financial conflicts. We really need to put those conflicts aside and have this conversation. And we need to talk about them. I would suggest at the intersection of climate, ecology, and health. And because this makes a difference in every community, into all of our well-being, every piece makes a difference, even those little forests in Hartford. So in sum, these are the green and blue ribbons that we all need to sustain our home and our brain health. And as a biologist, I've worked a lot in epilepsy, and there's a saying, seizures beget seizures. So it's kind of a like iterative process that's a negative process, but life supports life. And it's kind of that simple. And I think our best future really depends on our brain health. So this is a brain problem, and we can solve it with our brains, with clear decisions. Thank you.
And for you probably are getting tired of Antonio again. But I have an experience to share with you about a narrative and connecting science with the public. It is important to illustrate there is hope. This is a story of the flying rivers, of the narrative. How low-level jets that Herman mentioned here, in the early 2000s, this was the name of these flows of low-level currents of air near the surface. And it was known in the science, and I remember seeing this, and I thought, why do you give this name, low-level jets? Why jets? Why low level? What does that mean? And back then, I met aviator Gerard Moss, the late Gerard Moss, and he was an adventurer, he was an entrepreneur, and he was also a marketeer. And we met in the top of the tower in the Amazon, 2006, and he said, Antonio, I am running out with my project. He had a project called Brasil das Águas. He had a hydroplane. He landed on rivers and lakes, got samples of water. It was really fascinating stuff. But he didn't just do that for the sake of science. He was distributing the samples to limnologists to study the water, but he was going to the national TV and making, programs in the TV, the public TV, to show his adventure, seeking the water. So he said, Antonio, I am running out of that project. Do you have an idea for a project? And I told him, I said, you have an airplane. Why don't you follow the rivers of vapor? He said, what's that? So in 2 hours, in the way back from the forest to Manaus, I told him about the rivers of vapor, of the story, the low-level jets. He got so fascinated. In 2 weeks, he had 5 million from Petrobras, the oil company in Brazil. And we set up this project called the Flying Rivers. And we invited the community, the scientists, to come in on board. And we developed it for a few years until Gerard put this in this narrative of adventure. And by doing this, we could capture the imagination of people, besides capturing the moisture from the forest, and capture the action as well. And so the Flying Rivers was a persuasive narrative. It was there sitting in science. It was knowledge that we had already, but it wasn't converted into a narrative that people would immediately identify. So this was so enrapturing, the narrative of the Flying Rivers. People said, oh, what is really this? I brought here really few clips.
The Amazon rainforest is considered the lungs of the earth, supplying oxygen, but perhaps it is also its heart, pumping wind and water around the planet. New scientific work shows how forests, sweating out water, provide the rain they need. Brazil's water cycle depends on the Amazon. With forest loss and degradation dramatically speeding up, the Amazon biome may have already reached a point of no return, with devastating consequences for the whole planet.
For a long time, the immense Amazon rainforest has been considered the green lungs of the planet and a formidable reservoir of biodiversity. Its hundreds of billions of trees absorb carbon and release oxygen, a vital contribution to making our planet breathable and limiting its warming. Its global climate role is not in doubt, but rampant deforestation threatens it. It has been watched, measured, scrutinized by researchers around the world for decades. 15 years ago, it was discovered that it was overflowing with powerful streams of moist air. Thanks to the discovery of the flying rivers, a new forest reality has emerged. Roots have an important role, which consists in giving a physical support to the tree. This is why they grow outwards in all directions from the trunk. This bikia has developed a root called a taproot, much longer than its aerial part, so it can reach the water table. But to nourish itself, its root system has also developed a symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. This partnership enables the roots to draw water molecules and minerals. These inputs of water and mineral salts will form sap, which is crucial for the life of the tree. Behind the bark is a tissue called xylem, an ultra-efficient tube system where sap circulates to make its ascent. Tree transpiration has long been known of, but the impressive amounts of water vapor actually transpired has only recently become apparent. The structure of the large trees of the Amazon forest acts as an immense surface of solar panels, which explains the phenomenal amount of transpiration of the trees.
When the water hits the top, the combination of sun and wind turns it into a mighty river, a flying river.
The Amazon rainforest covers 40% of South America, contains nearly 400 billion trees, and creates 1/5 of our planet's oxygen. The river basin feeding the mighty Amazon carries 1/5 of Earth's river water into the Atlantic Ocean every day. This water adds enough mass to the continent that it distorts the gravitational field over South America. But the river at the center of this is not the biggest river on Earth. There's one that's even bigger, but it's invisible, flying around in the sky. I promise I haven't lost my mind.
The largest rainforest in the world, the Amazon, exists between two rivers, but not in the way you might think. At ground level, the Amazon River and its tributaries weave their path, but above the canopy, bigger waterways are on the move. These flying rivers are almost invisible, but are essential to life on Earth. As rain seeps into the soil, trees draw water back up through their roots and pump it through their trunks for nourishment. The leaves and stems transpire or release excess water in the form of vapor. In the Amazon, a fully grown tree transpires between 200 and 1,000 liters of water a day. This collective release creates a startling phenomenon: huge jets of rapid, humid air that constantly flow above the canopy. Dubbed flying rivers by a Brazilian climatologist, These aerial waterways carry about 20 billion tons of water through the air per day. This is more than the Amazon River's daily output into the ocean. Flying rivers for encountering the Andes. The mountains act like a giant barrier, causing the winds and rivers to redirect southwards. When flying rivers meet the masses of cold air, they grow heavier and release torrents of water. In this way, they bring rain, cooler temperatures, and humidity to much of South America.
Okay, conclusion. Flying rivers went viral. Okay, if you make a search in YouTube, you have 2,650,000 hits. Okay, on the topic, and Google has 77 million hits. So, how could scientists ever hope to have this kind of penetration without the artists, without the filmmakers, without the the creative people who can grab an appealing narrative and transform it completely and make it into a fantastic success story. And the success story is so powerful. I tell you because I was in Brazilian Congress in one of the hearings about the forest code, and I got a guy who once, he was former governor of this Mato Grosso state. He won once the Chainsaw Award because he was a deforester. Horrible, horrible deforester. And this guy came, tapped on my back and said, Antonio, this flying river story is so important for us because we have agriculture and we depend on the water. He understood it from the flying rivers narrative, not ours, not the scientists, but from the Bettinas and Pascals and so many others. So this is an incredible thing. The only effort I had to do was to concoct a very enticing storytelling from the scientific perspective. If we get rid of the technical terms and we build something that's, enrapturing. So, and finally, I have my, can you get my I just found this in a museum in London 2 weeks ago. It's called Rewild the World at Bedtime. This is a story, just one that I put on Oslo Highway for bees. And this Emily Hawkins, and it was illustrated by Ella Beach. They got a real story and they converted it into bedtime story for kids, which is really, really beautiful. You can take a look after this. So this is so it's not only movies, but also all sorts of initiatives that can be, but for this to happen, we have to, I would say, breed in the good sense. We have to intermingle, we have to interconnect and articulate different sectors. So these are just two examples. Thank you.
All right, we are going to end the day with a story about stories. Once upon a time, there was a writer. Now, we can't exactly call her young, although that usually makes for a better story, but she was new to her topic, so she had a bit of the quality of the ingenue. While researching a book about soil, she bumped into a document entitled Water for the Recovery of the Climate, the New Water Paradigm. This small book, and we have one of the authors, Jan Corney, of this book.
The tool will appear tomorrow.
Wonderful, wonderful. This book shows the importance of holding water in the landscape. That's instead of sluicing it away as the built environment is designed to do. This matters for climate as it keeps landscapes hydrated and cool. It keeps ecosystems functioning. The authors note that transpiration, the work of plants, consumes solar heat and so is an essential cooling mechanism. Our writer was in bed with the flu that day and read this little book online from start to finish, taking breaks to drink mugs of tea. This was a very different story of climate than what she usually encountered. Like any good reporter, she kept up with the regular news, and infinitely more hopeful, because the conventional view of climate change, hello Keeling curve, gives us little to do beyond cross fingers and hope the grown-ups will slash carbon emissions. But here, we learned that we can work with the water cycle. So that was something very big. Shortly after, our writers stumbled upon the biotic pump. That's an image from that very film, Rivers Above the Canopy, whereby natural forests drive the movement of moisture and thereby heat. And so not only does water have agency, but forests have agency too. Why was no one talking about this? A dutiful reporter, she sent a whole bunch of article pitches to a whole bunch of publications. If this were a Hollywood type tale, we would hear that editors would rally, policymakers and climate folks would embrace water cycle solutions, and the biotic pump would be a household word. But no, that didn't happen. Aside from a few breakthroughs, she was brushed aside. At one point, for an on-spec article, that means we'll publish if we like it, as opposed to, hey, you've got an assignment. She asked several renowned scientists about the water cycle's significance to climate. They laughed. Oh, you silly girl. But then, as we know, she was undeterred. That book that includes material about how water influences climate. And I have a chapter in which I interview Antonio, and there's lots of material about the biotic pump with Anastasia as well. All of this is to say that communicating something that is, one, different from what everybody else is saying, and two, more complicated than a simple metric, is an uphill battle. This might be changing, which is an incredible opportunity and why it is meaningful that we are here today. First, let's look at how water is generally talked about. As a noun, a resource that lives on spots on the map where it's colored blue. As something that either does or doesn't come down from the sky, and you just have to wait and see what happens. I remember during California's big drought, which wasn't this year, I can tell you from experience. I was in California recently and it rained for 8 days straight. But no, there was a drought. Anyway, back then, there was an article making the rounds that in order to surmount the drought, we needed 17 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of rain, okay? Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water to come down from the sky. And then we could say goodbye to the drought. That made me laugh, for if most of that rain ran off or evaporated, California would be back in drought in no time. The point is, it's important to look at how water works, to look at water as a verb. Water is always moving, meandering. It's holding and transferring heat. The same goes for forests. Rather than being an inert noun, trees are busy, making sugars, moving moistures, emitting aerosols that seed the rain, trading nutrients, feeding fungi and microbes, and feeding people too. As eco-philosopher Peter Donovan says, nature doesn't just sit there and look pretty, it does work. Back to our story. Fast forward 10 years, and that journalist is a wizened veteran in the effort to invite the climate concerned to embrace nature's complexities. And she, I have learned much about communicating, which I am happy to share with you now. Respect people's intelligence. We have a loud and crowded town square, and people are touchy. Communicate in order to encourage people to access their own intelligence as someone else was saying, find our own indigenousness, their own intelligence. The ways that water and forests work are intuitive and very, very real and tangible once you pay attention. So invite people to channel their inner 8-year-old, to awaken that childhood curiosity about how the world works. Next, accept that the default tends toward conventional wisdom. The belief that climate change is just greenhouse gases is everywhere. This is as diffuse and ubiquitous as carbon dioxide itself. To break through, it helps to be disarming. One way is to present ideas as questions. For example, you might ask, how does the Earth manage heat? For once you think about it, you're already moving towards water, and the conversation can open up. You're no longer stuck with, well, we have to reduce emissions. Well, clean energy. What? Well, clean energy isn't always clean. Okay, so that opens it up. Play with words. As we saw with flying rivers, well-crafted memes can capture someone's imagination and break through information overload. My colleague Brock Dahlman at Occidental Arts and Ecology Center has a gift for sticky memes. He would say of water, slow it, spread it, sink it. This phrase has taken on a life of its own, and you hear it everywhere. What he really wants us to say is, slow it, spread it, sink it, store it, share it. So that's from Occidental. Build alliances, share and give credit to the source. Everyone's got different strengths and different formats where they thrive, and we can lift each other up. These days, I'm loving Alpha Low's Climate Water Project, which I encourage you to look at. I'm really impressed by how Alpha is stretching his curiosity and exploring his drawing ability. So this drawing represents the river salmon bear redwood water web up in Northern California. Remember that people respond to stories. When I was researching water in plain sight, I was at a conference and I ended up chatting with a woman with dark hair who said, I should tell you about the gushers. I said, gushers? That's interesting, do tell. And so I got to know Catherine Ottmers, who told me that she and her husband lived in West Texas in the desert, and they collected water from condensation in their rain barn. They had no idea how much water they were collecting solely from dew until the day in winter, one day in winter, 4 months after the last rain, when the water tank overflowed. I ended up flying down to far west Texas in the heat of July, and that led to a chapter in my book, Dew and the Desert. The point is that we are wired for story, not necessarily for facts. And you are probably a better storyteller than you think. Now, if Catherine had said to me, hey, condensation is really important, or did you know that the dew point is the temperature at which air is saturated with water vapor, do you think I would have booked a ticket to El Paso? I don't think so. It was the gushers that got me. And finally, remember that verbs make for better stories than nouns, especially when you've got cute animals doing the verbing. This is one of Brock Dahlman's photos. He's a champion of beavers, long been more than a decade. And his work and other people's work helped the state of California shift their policy to see that beavers are assets as opposed to an impediment to what people wanted and are therefore pests that should be eradicated. So this is a huge, huge change. Beavers have, I would say, have done more to alert people to the ways of water than anyone or anything. Ask me about donkeys and water in Australia. Animals influence the water cycle and not always in the ways that we expect. clearly we don't lack, clearly we don't lack for stories to share about water, forests, and climate. Thank you.